This is the new SEC.
All right, and we're back. This is a new SEC podcast, episode 13. This week gave us absolute cinema.
5 of the top 11 teams lost this week. Some big upsets outside the SEC, in the SEC. Huge week for college football.
Massive week for college football. When you have a week like this where it's stacked with unranked teams playing ranked teams, there's only one of two things that can happen. Either it's business as usual and these ranked teams handle their opponent, or it's upset season. And this week was just absolutely catastrophic in the best way. It made everyone take a step back and say, okay, who is actually good? Is it Bama? Is it Georgia now? Is it Tennessee? I mean, who is actually good now? We don't know, but we'll talk about it in this episode because we're going to talk around the country what we saw. We're going to talk in our SEC shakeup session, giving you our week 7 power rankings, and then we'll do our game recaps and just kind of where every team should feel and think about from a fan perspective where they should be going next. What are some things to build upon if you won your game this week? What are some areas to improve upon if you lost? And what's the overall outlook for the season for the teams we saw in this week's action with week 6?
Yeah, a lot of stuff coming up. But before that, around the country, some good games. I think one that maybe slipped under the radar with all of the things going on, ACC still trying to make their way up. Miami taking care of business with some help, maybe. Clemson taking care of business with Florida State, but Louisville dropping to the new ACC team in SMU. That's pretty big for where the ACC sits, maybe getting multiple teams into the playoff.
Yeah, definitely pretty big for them. And SMU certainly impressed. I mean, I think Kevin Jennings is their quarterback over there, took the job over from Preston Stone, and he's been absolutely dominant. They have 3 teams, I think, with only one loss in the loss column. So that looks good, I think, when it comes to where they might find themselves in the committee's eyes going towards conference championship season. And like you said, Miami was able to pull away very close at the end. Once again, these late night games, some people might not be watching them, but Miami was able to slip away with the win there. And the jury's still out, I think, for what people think of Miami as a team and their viability to be a true championship contender.
I think they might be on fraud watch for me. I don't know. They're winning games. Cam Ward is doing his thing. 2 weeks in a row, some questionable things. I think it was targeting, but whatever. Miami, they're strong right now. I think Cam Ward is probably going to be in New York for the Heisman. Like, he's doing things. He looks confident behind there. I think a lot of NFL teams will be happy to have him. So a lot to look forward to in the ACC and seeing where that goes. Right now, Miami and Clemson taking the top 2 spots there. But group of 5 all of a sudden means just so much more now. We've talked about Boise State over and over. They're pulling away a little bit. UNLV lost to Syracuse. Boise State took care of business, so that's good for them. And vying for that 12 spot. But like with all these teams losing, it could be higher than 12. I don't know.
Yeah, I never thought we would be here today saying the spot could be higher than 12 with all these teams losing, and it's not a guarantee that the group of 5 gets the 12 seed. It is there's 5 guaranteed spots, 1 G5 spot, but it can be ranked anywhere between 1 and 12. And so with UNLV going down in a really close one to Syracuse, that changes the landscape for sure. They still kind of control their destiny, I think, since they're playing Boise State. Boise came in this week in the AP, I think number 17 in the nation, so highest group of 5 ranked team. I think that's about where they belong. I would say they could probably compete against some of these top Big 12 teams, like a BYU still undefeated, like a Utah, and I think Arizona played this weekend as well against Texas Tech from the Big 12 side. But bringing it back to the G5, it's a little bit of stiff competition. Army still undefeated, Navy still undefeated, both of them 5-0. And then, Boise State is still undefeated. They took care of business against Utah State. The stats right now for Ashton Genty are just out of this world. He's over 1,000 yards in the season in just 5 games played, which is just unbelievable.
Yeah. I mean, he's leaving games at half and still putting up like almost 200 yards. It's crazy.
Yeah. He's the kid that you're all taking a test together in class and he leaves within the first 10 minutes.
Yeah.
He gets 100.
It's crazy. I mean, I think he's probably the most NFL ready guy from this Heisman rankings that we talked about last week. He's just unreal. I mean, he played great, and it's not only against lesser competition. He played so great against Oregon. We don't have to go down that whole road again. But yeah, I mean, Oregon, speaking of them, they took care of business. Ohio State took care of business. I don't think we've seen Ohio State tested at all this year. Iowa would have been maybe that first one. their offense still kind of miserable. So nothing there. I mean, the SEC was kind of where it was at this weekend.
Yeah, and look, I'll put some respect on Ohio State's name.
Okay.
I think Iowa's a good team. I think in some ways it's Ohio State's defense stifling Iowa, and Jeremiah Smith is getting a lot of coverage, but maybe just not as much as Ryan Williams. But he is incredible. I think he's right now better than Ryan Williams, but they're both really good. I know this is an SEC podcast, but I mean, some of these one-handed catches he's making are incredible. Yeah. And so I'm excited for them to take an AP level test. I would say that, Iowa's like a level 2 test if we're going high school rankings here. But from an AP perspective, they got one coming up here with Oregon, the other team you were just talking about, for week 7. And so we're filming this right now on Tuesday, and it'll be out on Wednesday, but really some exciting games that are going to be coming out. And one of those featuring Oregon and Ohio State for this upcoming week. But week 6, business as usual for them. They're looking solid, and the Big Ten starting to creep up a little bit more in the top 10. I think we saw a jump from Penn State this week to number 4 in the AP. I have some interesting thoughts about that, but I think in some ways they just have to rank the teams that are undefeated and don't have any blemishes on their resume just yet. So
yeah, I mean, Michigan dropped pretty big. USC, Southern California dropped all the way out after a loss. I mean, they're separating. The Big Ten is kind of separating.
USC's had a tough stretch, I think, the last couple of games, right? I mean, they lost to Michigan, then they played a really close game with Wisconsin, who is not really good, and then they lose to Minnesota, who is unranked. So that's not where they want to be finding themselves at, and it's coming off of a hot start. Beating a good LSU team up until that point. Michigan finding themselves where I thought they would be. I didn't think the loss was going to come from Washington, but that offense has looked pretty fraudulent most of the season compared to what we saw last year, from my perspective.
Yeah. No, I don't believe in Michigan. I don't believe in Michigan at all. So they were due to drop. I mean, 10 was too high. I mean, you got to rank them based on what the record and all that says. But
Indiana, they're still winning though. They're I feel like there's this crop of teams around the country, and they're not as big of brands as the Bamas and the Georgias, but it's like Pittsburgh's undefeated still. I think Duke's still undefeated. I'm trying to think. There's another one. BYU, like they're floating around, but it's like the AP voters and the coaches poll voters are waiting for them to play a higher caliber team before they give them that same respect they might get if they were a Miami who's playing FAMU in certain weeks, or if they were an Ole Miss. And so I'm not saying that they're like unjustly ranked, but I think that there's not as much emphasis on these undefeated teams of the Indianas from the Big Ten, just because they haven't played as good teams and they don't have that brand prestige in some ways. Yeah.
Rank the service academies. Put Army and Navy on there. Let's have a ranked Army Navy poll.
It feels un-American. Like I think you gotta rank the service academies, and I think Army played Air Force this weekend, if I'm not mistaken.
Navy
did. Yeah, it was one of those. So both water versus air. Air Force got the planes, and the Navy got planes too, though.
Yeah. I mean, good week all around. I mean, week 6 probably one of the best weeks, and we talked about all the other conferences, and SEC was probably the biggest one. We'll talk about it more here in a minute.
Isn't this like what makes college football so great? Like these types of weeks, like you get to see these big upsets. Like if you went in and it was just rock chalk, it wouldn't be as fun.
Yeah, I mean, Texas A&M winning, they weren't underdogs in Vegas going into this game. They were at home, but it still felt like a huge win, upsetting the top 10 team just from the ranking standpoint. Alabama going down, which was crazy. The field goal post ending up in the, Cumberland River. Tennessee losing to Arkansas, which we didn't predict it, but we knew there was potential for that to happen. I think Arkansas scarier. We'll talk more about that too. But I mean, it's games like that. You had a whole slate of games on Saturday that had some sort of like something to it. If you were watching all the way through, you saw A&M win. Alabama lose, Vandy win, and then you saw Tennessee, all back to back.
All back to back. And the thing is, it's like you had the 3:30 game slot, had Georgia Auburn, which really it was close, but it didn't feel close if you look at game control. But I think I was listening to Josh Payton. He was saying, like, I bet the SEC network ratings in the fourth quarter of that Vanderbilt game skyrocketed, because it was one of those things where it was like 23-21, and you're like, wait, it's the third quarter. This is still close. but it's on SEC Network. Like, I guess I'll go look, and then you see, that big 35-yard pass for Vandy to go up 30 to 21, and we got a real game here. But this Saturday had those types of games. That was maybe the number one game, but it was on SEC Network. Then you had, of course, you talked about kicking it off was Missouri versus A&M. Yes, A&M was a favorite. What, 2.5 points? I mean, it wasn't supposed to be 41-10. This game, I think a lot of people have thought very differently about Missouri after this game, and we'll talk about it in our power rankings. But I think people thought these teams were even. I don't know if we thought they were 41-10 from a, A&M ceiling to clearly Missouri's floor in that game from the performance that we saw. And then, Ole Miss, South Carolina, kind of, you were watching that to see what Ole Miss was going to do, like how they're going to come out and coming off the loss and what type of team they were. And, they handled business. It took care of business there. Florida keeps it rolling, 24-13. Great game control in that game for Florida. This was one of those, I think, 2 or 3 games this season that could have determined Billy Napier's fate. And, he continues to do fine, right? He's beaten now 2 Power 4 teams in a row and had the bye week. So Florida's rocking and rolling. But a good week of SEC football. And I think some of the best football came from this conference with number 1 going down, number 4 going down, and number 8 or 9 for Missouri going down as well. So.
Yeah, and people want to say, SEC, look, they're getting exposed because look at all these top teams losing, but they're losing to SEC teams. If anything, that speaks to how strong the SEC is because there's that parity all around. Like, Vanderbilt taking out at the beginning of the season what was considered to be a strong ACC competitor. Virginia Tech almost beat Miami or did beat Miami, depending on what you think of the video replay. I'm going to give Miami a hard time like every week now. But
hey, look, they've had some interesting tests here with Virginia Tech and Cal, and you're allowed to believe what you want to believe. One of these segments we got to look at the top SEC schools and look at some of the other schools that are ranked across the nation and say, okay, where do we think Penn State ranks in the SEC power rankings?
Ooh, it's interesting.
Like where does Utah rank in the SEC power rankings? Like for me, Miami, I would put them probably around 2 or 3. But see, I think you'd put them a little lower though.
I would put them a little lower. But that's a good segment. Let's save that. We could do that. That'd be good. I don't know where I put Miami right now. Like, I don't know. Off rip, 5.
All for it though. It's because that to me that speaks to how strongly we think about the SEC, and it is the best football out there, and it's being proven this year from the rankings where these teams are at to just how these teams have looked game control wise. To me, that's where the SEC is kind of shown out. And so our next segment we wanted to walk into is what we call the SEC shakeup. This week was one of those weeks where you came into the class, you had a B or an A, and you just failed a test that you're supposed to have in the bag for some teams. And we wanted to kind of revisit the power rankings for this week. We're about halfway through the regular season. It's crazy to think. Yeah. And so Hunter and I ranked our top 16 teams from 16 to 1, and so we got some thoughts there.
Yeah, and I think
what was the biggest mover and shaker for you in your ranking?
I mean, what moved? I'd say Missouri dropping, Tennessee dropping, were probably the biggest 2, right? Like, I think that those were big movers with losses. But looking at both of ours compared to where the AP poll sits, like both of us kept Alabama pretty high up. They were 1 going into this week and dropping, but they weren't a big mover. I think for you, were there any that? I mean, you dropped Tennessee and Missouri. Were there any bigger ones for you that kind of moved around?
I think A&M and LSU were the biggest risers this week. LSU de facto of not playing, but more importantly, like I've been really impressed with Garrett Nussmeier. They keep stacking W's. The bye week treated you well. I think Garrett Nussmeier is a top 5 quarterback in the SEC, and what his play is impressed me more than some of the other QB play that I've seen thus far from the de facto top 4 in the conference, prior to this past week. And then A&M. If that's A&M ceiling, I'll tell you what, that game in College Station at the end of the season is going to be a lot more interesting than I thought it was going to be the regular season when the season started. So A&M is looking pretty mighty right now, and so those are my 2 biggest risers there.
I think A&M looks good. You have them at 5. I have them at 3. The defense is starting to fire. We talked last week and we're like, oh, maybe Marcel Reed is the guy. You got to start Marcel Reed, or what do you do? Connor Wegman's healthy. He was healthy for this game and came in and just killed it. Like 4 incompletions on the day. Came out and played great. I think that they offensively with him at the helm and look a little better than Georgia right now, which is why I have them ahead. And defensively look solid too. Like Missouri has kind of been on that maybe fraud watch for a couple of weeks now, like because people question, the Vanderbilt game, they questioned the BC game a little bit. But they still came in and took care of business. So I got A&M pretty high. I mean, both of us have Alabama above Georgia, which I think differs from the AP poll. I have my reasons. Like, why do you have Alabama higher than Georgia?
Yeah, I mean, I think plain and simple. At this time, Alabama beat Georgia. Like, I think there's a time when the head-to-head win can be superseded by strength of schedule, the amount of quality wins you have. But right now, 6 games of the season, Bama beat Georgia. They had good game control the first half, and they were able to hold the lead in the second half. I don't see a reason why I would drop them in this scenario. Just because, yes, it was Vanderbilt. They played a close game, but if they won that game, they wouldn't drop. Like, that sounds obvious, but it's like, I don't think they would drop even if it was a close game against Vanderbilt. I think they'd still be ahead of them because they've won more games. So they've beaten them. So that's the main reason. It's not anything crazy or profound.
Yeah, I mean, right now Georgia's best win being Clemson, Alabama's best win being Georgia. I think people want to say, Alabama has a really bad loss, but it's still a SEC opponent in Vanderbilt who very well could be 5-0 right now. Exiting that game. So I think Alabama still looks strong if they could figure it out defensively. We'll get into that, but
maybe the AP, the offensively they do look solid. And this just came to me, but maybe the AP's thought was, okay, like Ole Miss or Kentucky beat Ole Miss. And so because Georgia played a close game against Kentucky, maybe they're kind of giving them the nod there. Since I'm trying to, because to me it's like I don't see how you could have them higher with a head-to-head game and they have the same record.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and we'll see where they go because they both have a lot more games to play. I think Georgia has more opportunities to even jump ahead because they're going to play Texas. So they're going to have a lot more opportunities to jump. I think Texas is the clear overall number one. I think Mississippi State, Auburn, and Florida kind of round out everybody's bottom 3. Yep. I would be hard-pressed to see somebody put a different team in their bottom 3 of those. I think Oklahoma, for me, would maybe be the only one that you could say is worse than one of those 3. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think you could make that case just given some of the offensive inconsistencies. The defense is still pretty strong, and I think that's been the strongest of the season. They held Tennessee to a very low point total. Yeah, when you look at our 14-16, we both have Florida, Auburn, Mississippi State. Our 13 is where we vary. So I have South Carolina, you have OU. And I have South Carolina 2 spots behind Kentucky at 11, and then I have OU at 12. So Kentucky 11, OU at 12, South Carolina 13. So you're probably thinking, why is that? So for me, I think that for Kentucky, they get the 11 spot with the strength of the win against Ole Miss. Okay. And yes, South Carolina beat Kentucky. But for me, that win against Ole Miss means more. I think that Kentucky has generally been trending more upwards. From Lenore Sellers, we haven't seen a passing touchdown in the last 2 to 3 weeks. He's only got 2 passing TDs on the year, and although he's great on the ground, the last 2 games on the ground he's been less than 50 yards, and so that's kind of their bread and butter from what I've seen from South Carolina. And when it's working great. But I think Kentucky, although they might not be as explosive offensively all the time, they do make less mistakes, and their defense has looked stronger. So to me, they look better from a eye test and overall game flow, game control right now.
I can completely feel that the progression of a team, because I don't think Kentucky's the same as when they played South Carolina and just got worked by them. I mean, there's no other way to say it, but then South Carolina just got worked by Ole Miss, who Kentucky beat. I mean, now that there's SEC games, you can do so much transitive property in here, but we do have a lot in common. So I think this is a pretty good, at least picture of where it's at. We have the same teams grouped in the same areas. Yeah, a lot of people may disagree with where A&M's at, where LSU's at. People may disagree with where Alabama and Georgia are flipped. But I think Missouri, Vanderbilt probably sitting the same on a lot of people's rankings right now. Arkansas could be on the rise, though.
Yep, and and Vandy, Missouri is one of those situations where if you're watching this, we both have Vanderbilt at 9 and Missouri at 10. Missouri beat Vanderbilt. So you're thinking, okay, well, if you have Bama over Georgia because of the head-to-head win, like what's different here? Vanderbilt has a better test on their resume. They beat Alabama, the number 1 team in the country, a team that Georgia couldn't beat last week, right? That is why Vanderbilt is higher, and I think that they've shown us more in games against Missouri, against Virginia Tech, where they've had a lead in every game going into the fourth quarter. So they have looked more impressive, and to me, it's like Vanderbilt's kind of like the Auburn of this year. Like if you kind of take the name off, it's like they're in games. They might always win them, but they're the Auburn, the Florida of this year. They're Vanderbilt. It's not Auburn or Florida.
Yeah, you got to take out the past when you're looking at these teams. Vanderbilt is much better than the Vanderbilt brand would imply. So
definitely. And cool. I'm looking at yours. I think we went over everything, right? Yeah, Mississippi State 16, Auburn 15, Florida 14, OU 13, UK 12, South Carolina 11, 9 and 10. We just talked about Vanderbilt, Missouri. What are your thoughts with Arkansas 8, Ole Miss 7, Tennessee 6?
So Tennessee right now, like for better or worse, like they did beat Oklahoma, they beat NC State. Whatever you think of those teams, you think of those teams. They didn't look great in the Arkansas game. They had the opportunity for a game-winning drive. I still think that they're a better football team than Arkansas right now. Like, I mean, Arkansas can continue to make that jump, but they have lost 2 games. With Ole Miss against Tennessee right now, if that game was happening, I would take Tennessee to beat Ole Miss. So like that's kind of where I'm looking at it from if they were playing head to head, who would I take? And that's where I'm kind of like doing those where it could go one way or another. Is Ole Miss over Tennessee, or vice versa. Ole Miss has a road ahead. Tennessee does too. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity for them to shake it up. So that's kind of my vision there. Some people might question why I have LSU over some of these teams because they lost too. A team that's now no longer ranked.
And I had the same thoughts, right? I'm like LSU and Ole Miss's resumes are somewhat similar. They both have a 1 loss or 1 or 2 losses. And LSU, their most impressive wins are UCLA and South Carolina and South Alabama. They aren't like amazing teams, but they're, you got 2 Power 4 teams and you got South Alabama. But Ole Miss really hasn't played too many good teams outside of South Carolina, so similar to LSU, and Kentucky. So who they lost to in conference. And so that's why, among other reasons, I had LSU higher there. Who do you think has the biggest propensity to jump up in your power rankings when we think about this upcoming week?
I'm going to say Oklahoma has the biggest opportunity to jump for sure, because if they could beat Texas, then that's a huge jump. Now, I don't think that they have the highest. They have the biggest jump possible to make. I don't think that they have the opportunity to make maybe the biggest jump. Mississippi State could be Georgia. They'll jump a ton. I don't know. I mean,
I get what you're saying.
Beat Alabama.
Like realistic jump. Realistic jump. Yeah.
Realistic jump. I think it would take a team to maybe to lose. I mean, LSU could jump if they beat Ole Miss. Ole Miss could jump if they beat LSU. I think that's the most evenly matched game for this upcoming week, where these 2 teams could just
flip-flop there. Yeah.
With on yours or mine. Like, it's an impressive win for either team.
Definitely. And those are the kind of probably 2 of the main games this week coming up if you're listening to our power rankings part of this segment, but it's the Ole Miss LSU game. And of course we talked about some of the Texas Oklahoma game, right? So if Oklahoma came out and they somehow beat Texas by 14, controlled the majority of the game, then they will be right around 8 in mine, I would say.
Okay. Yeah, that's probably fair.
Yeah.
The game's got to be played. We'll play the games and see what happens, and then.
Yeah, and I do want to give one more love in this segment to Arkansas. We've talked a little bit about it, but major upset for them. The fans over at Arkansas have been great listeners to the show and are loving this season thus far. But very impressive. Gets them to the number 8 spot. You're 2 spots behind the team you beat, but you're in that realm of teams that are in playoff contention right now, and that is because you're able to put, for the most part, a game together, right? Taylor Green, no turnovers. Jaquindon Jackson, not super impressive yards wise, but a couple tutties. And so you add that game plus what we've seen this season in some of these games with Oklahoma State, close loss, in other games that have been good wins. So that's why Arkansas is in that middle spot.
Yeah. No, I completely understand. I mean, that kind of rounds out the power rankings. And while you're talking about Arkansas, let's talk more about Arkansas then.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we should, huh?
yeah, we can talk more about it. I mean, Arkansas going in as 2-score underdogs at home in Fayetteville against the Tennessee Volunteers, and they win 14-19 behind a game-winning drive by their backup quarterback, backup running back in the game, and they came in and made things happen. Huge win for Arkansas, field storming, big emotion for them. Arkansas's got to feel so strong going forward into what's to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And Arkansas should feel really good about what's going to be coming up for them. That game gave a lot to build on. I would say the main two things to build on is your quarterback room looks pretty decent. Taylor Green played, you can build off his best game. He made some really key throws during this game. When they were after Tennessee scored and took that lead, they were able to drive down the field, and they had that really big pass to Andrew Armstrong. I think a big 30-yarder to show that they have the ability to sustain drives and to make big plays when it matters. And that was the difference we saw, for me, what I saw in this game from Arkansas, that I think if they could build upon, this puts them in a different class of a team now that I've seen it.
Yeah. Yeah, they're definitely moving offensively in the right direction. They could be, I say this about so many teams, but they could be undefeated right now. Like the Oklahoma State game was so close. With A&M, they had that shot there at the end of the game. With the strip sack there. But if you're looking at Arkansas and you're a fan of another team like LSU, Texas, or Ole Miss, you're now all of a sudden like, okay, maybe if you didn't watch those other games, you're on watch now. You're like, okay, this is a team that could upset any of these teams, and I wouldn't feel crazy about it now.
No, not at all.
I mean, and you mentioned sustained drives. Like they're one of the best third down teams in the country. I think they're second in the nation or something like that, or top 5 in the nation for third down conversions per game. And this was one of their worst third down conversion games, but you saw it come up in huge plays. They got out of the safety on a 3rd and 15.
Yep, big play of Jaquinda Jackson there.
Huge,
really big,
huge.
Really big run.
They had 2 third down conversions on the drive before that. And I don't think that they even left it all out on the field. Like they left points that they could have scored. So I think if you're looking forward for Arkansas, like they missed a field goal. They had a couple drives in the red zone that could have gone better. So it could have even been more than that. Your 2 best offensive players also got hurt, and you had the 2s in there, Malachi Singleton and Braylon Russell, and they made it shake. So
yeah,
good for them, man. Good for Arkansas.
Good for Arkansas. And they had another running back who was playing pretty impressive. Big boy. I think he was like number 0.
Yeah, Braylon Russell.
Bumbling and stumbling to his over 50 or 60 yards that game. And so it's like you said, if you had to find something to improve upon, it's taking advantage of those points you left on the field and turning that into touchdowns. They had I think they had a key turnover in the game as well, and they were able to turn that into a touchdown, if I'm not mistaken. So just overall great performance from Arkansas, a lot to build upon. I'm really happy for Sam Pittman. I'm sure he feels a lot more relieved after taking down a top 5 team at home. Out there in Arkansas.
Yeah, and you got to feel like maybe we were wondering if he was going to have the job down the road, and like Travis Williams, the defensive coordinator there, maybe being the guy to take it. He could get a job at another school now after the defensive performance here. The blitz packages were kind of crazy. They dropped 4 into coverage a lot and sent 7, all kinds of unique blitzes. Nico's kind of living on the run back there. They blocked their running back on more plays than they usually do. So they didn't have that extra option for a pass play because they were, Landon Jackson was living in the backfield to sack a couple hurries. So the defense, I think, for Arkansas gives their offense, which even in this game, they're shaky at times for consistency. It gives them so much more room to work when you're holding a team like Tennessee to 14.
Oh yeah, when you got guys like Stephen Dixon and TJ Metcalf in the secondary who are who both can make big hits, but also can play great the ball from a defensive back perspective. It really helps, and you saw a lot of those stunts this game. Nico was taken down, I think, 6 times, which is the most he's been taken down all season. Recorded his lowest passer rate in this game, and so that's to me a byproduct of what this Arkansas defense led by Travis Williams at DC was able to do, and just in a really impressive performance, slowing them down and whatnot in this game.
Yeah, and wrapping on Arkansas, they have a bye week this week, and then they get LSU back in Fayetteville again. that's another huge one that I feel like Arkansas has a good shot at taking down. They can put some pressure on Nussmeier. We'll break that game down when we get to week 8. But you got to feel good if you're Arkansas.
You got to feel good. I mean, if I'm looking at their next 3 games, LSU, Mississippi State, and Ole Miss, I think those are all winnable games.
Yeah.
So you got to feel good coming off of this win. Got to take them one at a time. But man, that's got to be a good one. Woo Pig Suey for sure. So on the other side, there was Tennessee, their opponent. There's some things you can learn from this game and take away. And I think Oklahoma kind of set the blueprint of how to slow down this offense and Nico, but minus Dylan Sampson. But Arkansas followed that blueprint. But for Tennessee, what would you have liked to see more of from the offense this game?
From the offense, I think the O-line, I don't think played very well. We talked on the flip side about Arkansas getting to the quarterback often. I don't think that the outside of the line was playing as strong as they could. The tackles were giving up a lot of pressures on the edge. The pocket was collapsing on Nico quite often. And we know when he has time to sit in the pocket and pick defenses apart, he's really solid at that. But as a younger guy, the awareness maybe isn't there. We saw him go out of bounds at the end of the game.
Yeah.
We've seen some strip sacks here and there and a couple poor plays. He has so much talent, but when you don't want to have the pocket collapsing on him and forcing him to improvise and extend plays. It felt like the passing scheme kind of fit the way the O-line was playing. There was a lot more shorter passes, whereas in previous games, you've seen him air it out. So I think from them, it just didn't feel like the identity was there offensively. You mentioned Oklahoma kind of painted the blueprint for that. So maybe that is their identity. So
yeah,
they're 2 big tests, Oklahoma and Arkansas here. They haven't really performed offensively to the degree that you would like to see.
Yeah, no, and in this game, it was a game that they weren't really as bailed out as much defensively as we've seen in the past, like you've mentioned against Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
On the defensive side, it felt like Arkansas was having their way from a big play perspective. You saw it with that big 26-yard catch from Jaquindon Jackson to get them out of the red zone. You saw it with another big throw to Andrew Armstrong, 30-yard catch later in the game to kind of keep the chains moving. They were averaging 9.9 yards a pass given up, and Arkansas had over 6 receivers averaging 14 yards a catch. I mean, you're pretty much giving up a first down every time the ball's in the air, and that's not going to be a way to win games. But the thing is, if you watch this game, and I'm sure people who are listening watched it, they were still able to get a lead in the third. Dylan Sampson, he pretty much took over and had 2 touchdowns in the third quarter, big 53-yard run. And was able to kind of punch it in the end on that same drive. They still have enough to win offensively. It's just they need to make less mistakes, like you mentioned, turning the ball over on the offense. Not being aware of the time left in the game when you're running for a 4-yard scamper when you need to get the ball in the air, right?
Yeah.
But it just seems like on both sides they just didn't give their best game. Like it wasn't their worst game, but it was not good enough when you're playing a team like Arkansas and you're on the road and you have given them some life. You've let them have a lead for 2 quarters. You've given them the idea that they can win this game, and they showed that, okay, like if you're going to give us a chance to win it, we'll win it.
Yeah. And I mentioned it with the Arkansas bit and shoulda, coulda, woulda, but Arkansas could have put up way more points. The fourth down at the beginning of the game where they kicked the field goal as opposed to getting the touchdown there. He looked open with a better pass to score. They missed the field goal. They went for it on the 4th and 1 in field goal range. That could have been another 3 points on the board or more if they would have converted it.
Yep.
So there were a lot more opportunities even for Arkansas to extend this. You get the opportunity. You never want to see an injury, but you get the opportunity where you bring in a quarterback who the only time we've really seen him play in a big game this year, Malachi Singleton, he didn't play very well. Yep. They bring him in. Jaquindon Jackson's out of the game for a little bit as well, and you still let them get a full drive together. They let him score at the end for sure, but you let him get to that point. So the defense, I don't think, was really firing as well as they could have. The run game, Dylan Sampson played well. Aside from that 53-yard run that he had, it was a pretty average day for him. That kind of was a huge bunch of his yards. And that was the bright spot though. So you have the pieces. You mentioned it. You have the blueprint. You have the pieces if you're Tennessee to do what you need to do. It's just putting it all together on the field. And I think the offense firing is the big one. Brew McCoy, kind of a late bloomer in the game. They didn't get him involved super early.
And I guess another silver lining is, like, Lisa, you're watching that last drive, and you see Nico make this big 42-yard throw to Dante Thornton. So you see the ability for him to make these plays and this 2-minute drill type situation, which is what you're going to have to deal with, during this season, playing teams like UGA and like Alabama coming up here in 2 weeks. And so that's a bright spot, I would say. Obviously he didn't finish the drive, but he got them in position. That's beautiful throw. Like, being able to evade, that potential sack to make that great pass. And so something to build upon there for Tennessee, but definitely a tough loss to take when you had that game control in the third quarter and just couldn't really, keep it.
Yeah. Yeah. And now you have Florida next week, which, last time they played, Florida kind of gave it to them, not a huge win, but big win for Florida. Last time they played, it was behind Etienne, who's no longer there, so they don't have to worry about him. Tennessee maybe a couple of weeks ago was looking ahead to the Alabama game in 2 weeks, but now this Florida one, with the way that they're firing, means a little bit more and takes a little bit more focus. And I think the offense is going to need to step up in this game, especially in the passing game, because Florida is starting to, move some pieces and getting better.
Yeah. And, Florida, the last 2 games is definitely shown a little bit more of improvement defensively against Mississippi State and against, UCF. I wanted to say Arkansas because they have KJ Jefferson, but I knew it was UCF, of course. But they've shown some improvement defensively, and now the blueprint's been laid out twice when it comes to slowing down Tennessee's offense. But Dylan Sampson's still a dog, and he did show us that in that game. And so it'll be interesting how they do these next 3 games. This is a massive, important stretch of the season. If you get out of this stretch, 2-1, if you beat Bama, you're really set. But you beat Florida, you beat UK, you lose to Bama. I think you're still in playoff contention. So we'll see.
Big game of the week, probably the biggest college football game of the year. We said that about Georgia, Alabama last week, but this one all of a sudden felt like maybe more. And it's Vanderbilt taking down Alabama. It hurt me, but everyone else loved to see it. Vanderbilt 40, Bama 35. They were over 20-point dogs. And just, if anything was going to go right for Vanderbilt and any proper decision was going to be made, any play was going to be made, they did it. They brought their A game. Props to Vanderbilt, honestly.
Big props to Vanderbilt. I almost hate calling it an upset because this was total domination from Vanderbilt in all 4 quarters. There was not one point in the game that they didn't have a lead, and the Vanderbilt fans came out of the woodwork. Some of these people I've never seen in my life, but that's what winning does. And this program hasn't had a ton of success with winning. I think they were mostly scoreless against Bama the past couple games, and this game was definitely not one of those, putting up 40 points. The nation still, like, they got to see a glimpse of Diego Pavia, but it was on SEC Network. But if you watch the highlights, and I'm sure everyone did, they learned who this New Mexico State transfer was. We've been beating this drum since week 1, and he really showed that this offense can do a lot under him. I think he brings the best out of AJ Newberry. He brings the best out of Cedric at running back. He had 2 key rushing touchdowns in the first quarter in this game, and then good on Vanderbilt being able to force that turnover early on to make it 14-7.
They took it, went up 14, 0 off that kind of circus pick that they had, and you take advantage of the plays. You get in the receiver's face, you force them to make mistakes, and you get plays like that. And the Vanderbilt offense continuing to do what they did against this Alabama defense is the story. Vanderbilt's defense still did what they needed to do to an extent. I think a lot of people expected Alabama to score more than 35, and they didn't. No critique on the Alabama offense because I think they had a lot of things flowing. But the pick, Miles Capers getting the strip sack on Jalen Milroe, forcing that fumble, that was kind of the turning point in at least my mind and a lot of Alabama fans' minds, where it's like, oh man, like this isn't going to happen. This isn't going to happen for us. Right. So if you can go out there, your offense is firing, you get a play like that, that's great. The offense though for Vanderbilt, Pavia the offense is designed around him being a decision maker, making the right option read. He saw them, run the pitch option, speed option out to the outside and making those plays. And he made the right decision every single time. 4th and 1, throwing it downfield. It was just, he's on a run to just beat every team in the state of Alabama. He did it last year with Auburn, doing this year with Alabama.
I think you were texting me like you're like, Auburn's like, see, I told you. Like,
yeah. I mean, Eli Stowers came over with him from New Mexico State, and he had a day.
Yeah, yeah. I think they were both like top PFF grade guys. If I was looking at the rankings properly, Diego Pavia, I mean, over 260 yards in the game. The story is the offense. I can't help but focus on the positives because this is a Vanderbilt segment, and they won and they beat the number one team in the nation. Something that Georgia couldn't do last week. Georgia State pretty much beat Bama. If we're going to go transitive property. But transitive property aside, Vanderbilt is showing us something on offense that, if sustained, could allow them to win some more games in this conference. There's a general feeling around this team that this is a different team this year, and I think just there's so many of those moments in this game where you're watching it and you're like, oh, there's no way that they're going to win, but then they make these big plays and you're like, wait, hold on, like, they're actually doing this. They're actually in this game, right? Like you talked about that 4th and 1 massive 30-yard pass to Coleman Stowers in the end zone there. And that's when it felt like, okay, you go up 30 to 21 or 30 to 23 and it's in their hands. One of the big play, even at the end, it's like, Bama's trying to make these stops, and, Cameron Johnson, sophomore from Alabama, makes the biggest catch of his life. The only catch he's made this season. To take the lead at the end, and so there's something to build upon here on the offense. It was obviously just fun to see this goalpost make its way all the way down Broadway, but from a football perspective, what should be the general outlook for Vanderbilt fans with this offense they have there? Because the defense did show some gaps, and we could talk about that too. But offensively,
you're looking ahead, and we said at the beginning of the year, we said Vanderbilt's. They're due to upset an SEC team this year. We said it right at the beginning. They're going to beat some SEC team, and we don't know who it is yet. And it's going to be one, and it's going to be Alabama. And so here it is. And now you're looking ahead for them, and you're kind of looking at, okay, what's the path to the bowl games here? You have Ball State, chalk that one up. I hope chalk that one up, and now you're only looking at 2 more games. And initially, you're looking at Kentucky, Auburn, or South Carolina, and you're picking out of there. I think Auburn. For sure, there's opportunity there. All 3 of those are winnable games with this offense.
Yep.
Then you have Texas, LSU, and Tennessee, and it's like, okay, maybe we could pick up one of those too. Like we beat Alabama. Who says we can't beat LSU or Tennessee?
Exactly. At this point, it's like, how could you say we're not going to beat those teams with what you saw against Alabama? So
yeah, they show something really unique and different, and it's it's not just saying we have a quarterback who can run. Our keys to the game when we previewed this was, if you can get out and get Alabama's linebackers out of position, get them away from home where they're not there in the spots that they need to be, catch them on their heels, you could win this game. And they did that. And I think against any team in college football, if you're getting people confused on what's going on, you have a chance to win any game. So I don't think they're counted out for any game for the rest of this year.
I don't think they're counted out for any game for the rest of this year. And I think, if you're able to maintain the ball possession for 42 minutes, 7 of your 9 drives go for over 4 minutes a drive, like you can win a lot of games that way. And it's equally as impressive what Bama was able to do in 17 minutes, and we'll definitely talk about that in the next segment as well.
Yeah, rolling into it, why not? Alabama, they lost. It's Kalen Deboer's first loss of his Alabama tenure. He had a lot of high expectations coming into this year, and they were focused around the Georgia game. They're focused around Tennessee. They're focused around LSU. I think people overlooked Vanderbilt. Maybe Kane Womack, the defensive coordinator, maybe the players celebrated too early and overlooked Vanderbilt, and it showed on the scoreboard, 35-40. It's not what you want to see from an Alabama team, from the expectations and what you see from a talent perspective.
Definitely.
And we talked about this. Is this loss worse than Saban's first year loss against UL Monroe?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
No,
because this team is playoff ready. This team made the playoffs last year. There's obviously been some players who have left, Terran Arnold, Isaiah Bond, et cetera, et cetera. This is a playoff team. What Nick Saban took over was completely different to me.
So you think this is worse?
This is worse. 100%.
Okay.
This is worse. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think there's definitely an argument to be made for that. It's talent wise, probably the best coaching position that you could be in. You don't see coaches retire very often. It's usually a firing, and that leads to a whole other problems. He inherited a great roster. And what it felt like, and you've talked about tests and stuff this whole episode. So like I can keep the theme here, and it just felt like a test you didn't study for, and you showed up, you flipped it over. I told you this before. It's like you look at the answer, you look at it, you don't know anything on the test.
You're lost.
That's what Alabama's edges, their linebackers looked like all game. They were kind of sitting on their heels, like just letting guys run by them because they were confused as to the game plan. Like you didn't just watch Vanderbilt do this to Virginia Tech, do this to Missouri. I mean, it felt like they weren't ready for this game, and maybe they were looking ahead to South Carolina or looking ahead to Tennessee, and then you're fighting from behind. Offensively, it's fine. Offensively, you played great.
Yeah,
a couple mistakes here and there, but you can't be mad about it. I had a friend say, if you heard that if someone told you Alabama was going to score 35 in this game, would you think that they won? You would say yes. So it's more on the defense that they didn't perform to the level that they are capable of.
It is. And if I remember the timeline of the game, right, it was when Jalen Milroe fumbled the ball, it felt like that drive, they were going to get ready to get in that spot where they were with USF, where they were with Wisconsin, not necessarily Wisconsin, but USF, where they just blew the game up. Like, it was like, okay, like, this is cute. It's been close. Okay, like, we've been kind of not doing as much defensively. And then the turnover happens. Vanderbilt capitalizes on their second turnover with a touchdown, or I think 3 points. But it just felt like that was the point where they were going to make that jump. Mm-hmm. And then they just never really able to take control defensively for the majority of the game. I'm usually one to lean positively always, but this is Alabama, and
no positives.
There's no positives, and it's Alabama, and it's one of those things where what's the goal? Championship. Mm-hmm. Playoffs is table stakes. Championship's the goal. You've just taken down one strike. You probably got one or two more strikes left. You got one strike unless other stuff happens around the conference and around the country from a win-loss perspective to give you more chances to lose games. And this is not the game you want to lose. It's not because Vanderbilt's a bad team. It's just you want that loss if it's going to come to a tougher team when you're conference to Tennessee, maybe an LSU if it plays out that way. You wanted to have a clean track record going into those games where if you drop your first loss, you're probably still in that conference championship discussion. And so there's a lot of football to be played across the conference, but for Bama, controlling your own destiny, which is what I know Nick Saban talks about or has talked about in the past. This one's an interesting one to sit with. Yeah.
And the biggest thing, I think, looking at this Alabama team, and we can say the second half of the Georgia game defensively was not stellar, right? They blew a big lead. This game, they never performed well defensively.
Yeah.
And as you bring in a head coach from South Alabama to be your defensive coordinator, you expect a guy who can make adjustments, who can look at the game plan, and maybe you didn't plan right for the week, or maybe the team brings out a different look. Oh, there's something working against us that we didn't really prep for. I think for Vanderbilt, you should have known. But you come out and you bring the same thing all game, and it's not working. No adjustments, either game. And it's frustrating to see, you come out with this 4-2-5 nickel, which it works in certain ways, but it's a softer set. Yep. And you're not bringing unique blitzes. You're only rushing 4 on most plays, and they're not getting there. You're rushing 4 against 5, and Pavi has everything he can do. And It's not like your linebackers who aren't rushing or doing anything. They're kind of sitting there with their hands out wide, just waiting for someone to run at them. It felt like the defensive scheme where you're playing this man coverage, backs to the ball often. I couldn't count the amount of times I saw guys just running downfield with people still guarding their man, because it's just, the scheme didn't match what Alabama saw in Vanderbilt. And I think that looking forward, Ken Womack, defensive coordinator, needs to kind of, and I've seen it online, he's being held accountable by the fans. Yeah. He's being held accountable by the media. So I don't want to say he needs to be held accountable because he is, but I think that right now, combined with maybe some poor player IQ in making those plays and sitting on their heels, are the two-pronged problem to this game was the defensive coaching and that IQ issue.
I think that was definitely the definitive. Those are the two definitive, key points that we see on this defense that look like challenges. Like, and I think like I said, I didn't want to come in and sugarcoat this because it's the championship expectation. At the end of the day, it's like, what are our gaps? The obvious gap in this game was the defense. You talked about with that IQ. You talked about with some of these, very simplified packages that they're running defensively. And so he's hearing it on the forums. He's hearing it from people, I'm sure, on YouTube and people that watch segments like this. But it's coming from a place of, again, I keep saying it, but expectations. Like the talent's there. So it's like it's taking over a kitchen where the ingredients are always there. But the talent's there. I mean, like Xavier Brown, I mean, he's a freshman. He made the play of the game last week. Right. There's a lot of talent in this room. But this game, they didn't really show us as much defensively. I think this game wasn't Vanderbilt like 13 for 16 on third downs. I mean, they were just able to keep these drives sustained, and so gotta be able to get teams off the field offensively. I'm not going to skate over it because they played really well against expectation. But I mean, 17 minutes, you put up 35 points, two tutties from J.M. Miller in the first half. Like they're going toe to toe. They were going with him.
Yeah, I mean, Milroe, I don't think Jalen Milroe didn't lose the Heisman in this game. Like people say, he played great. You maybe from an offensive standpoint, your defense is gas, run the ball a little bit more. You have that. Let's slow the game down a little bit and not score so quickly, but you can't fault an offense for doing that. He played great. Other guys in the, Cam Ward above him, more, he's turning over the ball too. So it's not like this game's I'm Miami.
Here we go.
But look, Milroe, Mickey Mouse circus interception, and he lost the Heisman because of that. We saw Cam Ward throw it 40 yards across his body and perfect play to Cal. That's a whole other side tangent, but
yeah. Well, there's the Heisman discussion, and then there's like, who looks better, which is pretty much the Heisman discussion from a quarterback play. This past week, we saw a fumble from Jalen Milroe. We saw an interception, but we saw the typical design run plays. He had a design run touchdown, doing what he does. He shows up to work every week. And you know what he's going to give you. And I think Cam Ward shows up to work every week. And the argument to be had here is who has a tougher job. And I think Jalen Milroe has a tougher job.
Yeah. I mean, especially you look at games like last week, you look at games like this week where he's been asked. I mean, Cam Ward did it too. He's had to bring his team back in and win the game. I think this week and last week against Georgia, Milroe was not at fault maybe for the problems that Alabama was facing on the field. Like he was having to keep up with defensive issues. Yeah, there was the interception, the pick six. But looking at Miami, there were some offensive woes that maybe led to that situation where he had to get them back in the game. Carson Beck, when they were looking at him in the game against Alabama, like, oh yeah, great, he brought them back. I said this before, but like he kind of got them in that position a little bit too. Right. So in this one, I don't think that Milroe was the one that got them needing the points.
I get that, because it's like, is it the defense that got you in that position, or is it your turnovers that got the team in the position? And so if you look at it from that angle, from a Heisman lens, the slack that Milroe's getting is not fully justified given the flow of the game. But I think there is some similarities with the fact that both Miami's defense and the Alabama's defense have shown some challenges. Yeah, but
there's similarities. There's
some similarities there. But I still, objectively, bias or no bias, Georgia and Vanderbilt to me seem like tougher opponents than Virginia Tech and Cal.
Yeah. Wrapping up Alabama, I don't want to look past just their next game because they shouldn't do it either. So let's just talk their next game real briefly. And they got South Carolina, team with a good defense, rough offense. It's going to look like maybe a different flipped version of this game. If you're Alabama, you don't want to see a single point from South Carolina next week. Bring the defense, show up to work. I don't want to see anything but some good football, some good practicing this week from them, and make a statement. But that's what they got next on the schedule before Tennessee.
Yeah, South Carolina, noon, Eastern, national telly, ABC. Come out, party. What you got for us, Bama? Milroe's gonna get in that end zone a couple times.
I hope so.
And I mean, if South Carolina's offense starts going crazy, then we got some real concerns. We got some problems because from what we've seen from South Carolina, and we appreciate the comments if you're watching this whole segment onto some of our past stuff, but South Carolina's offense has been looking a little bit suspect. Texas A&M versus Missouri at noon, belt to ass. A&M, just absolute domination, 41-10. I think they hit the over. I'm sure some people were happy that field goal winning at the end there, but
man,
Missouri just didn't have it in them. But for A&M, what stuck out to you?
Yeah, and I think the question I had going into this game was like, I wanted Marcel Reed to start. I saw what he's done. He's done nothing but win. So how do you start somebody different? Connor Wegman lost, the opening game against Notre Dame at home in College Station. I was wondering post game, would you have won this game with either guy? I don't know, because all I could focus on was how good Wegman played. I mean, I don't know if it was Missouri coming out with a different game plan focused on the dual threat capability, but they looked a little, limp in the back in the defensive side of the ball, and Wegman just pieced it apart. So I think the story for this game is you got a guy going forward who is solid. I mean, he can piece some defenses apart that have good backs. And I like this Texas A&M team now behind him. I hate to be flip-floppy, but they looked good.
They look good. I mean, if the hot hand has been working for them, I think that's what you got to do in college football. I mean, we're seeing it a little bit at Florida. They're going to run Lagway and Mertz all season, but at A&M, Wegman played great. He looked super efficient back there, and he can run a little bit too. I think he had a little bit over 30 yards in the ground. Something like that. So they've looked super impressive. To me, the MVP is Le'Veon Moss. He's entered my dog category. I love me some good players. Like, he is a dog. Oh, he's the new SC podcast dog of the week. 2 touchdowns, hit the big old 75 yards, 3 touchdowns, 75-yard scamper. This was never a game, and Le'Veon Moss right now is first in the SEC in rushing yards after these last 2 weeks against Arkansas. Domination and against Missouri, domination from the score standpoint. So A&M fans, to me, Florida ceiling, your ceiling is raised. Like, once you show me you could do something like this, 41-10, now I'm like, okay, I need to see it for a couple weeks. I need to see it, because you've shown us what you could do, and I don't think that's fully all the way invested on Missouri being frauds. I think that's A&M when you match talent to talent. Missouri and A&M have similar talent. I think A&M's talent is a little more well coached right now.
Yeah, for sure. And shout out Le'Veon Moss, Amari Daniels also getting 2 in there. And the running game was just so solid. It opened up the pass game so much more. When you get things firing on both cylinders, it's so dangerous. And you mentioned, looking forward, like Texas A&M, you need to see it from them long term, and they have the schedule to do it. In this game, I wanted to call out something we talked about in the last episode. We talked about Marvin Burks Jr. from Missouri being a huge run stopper. We talked about him being maybe someone who could stop Marcel Reed, stop Le'Veon Moss. Looking at the game and looking at some of the stats after, against Vandy and Boston College, he played most of his snaps in the box from the free safety position. In this one, it was completely flipped. He had to play free safety. He had to cover the field because Connor Wegman was piecing him apart. He threw Missouri off of their defensive game plan. And it worked. And then defensively, they threw Missouri off of their game plan. We said it. You can't go running downfield with Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll and expect to go anywhere with this Texas A&M front 7. You got to throw the ball. Missouri couldn't do it effectively. A couple mishaps there, here and there, some questionable calls and a couple drops and things like that. But we knew it. Elko knows it. A&M players knew it. If you pressure Brady Cook, he's a little shaky, and they came out and did it.
Yeah, they brought a lot of pressure. Nick Scorton was everywhere in the backfield. Played a key role in a couple sacks in this game when I was watching the game. And this defense is firing all cylinders. The last couple of games they've only given up 24 points. 10 points this past game, and I think 14 points in the last game against Arkansas. Maybe a little bit more, close to that number. And so when you have defensive performances like this, and you get this offensive explosion, which is, I think, one of their highest points totals this season, that's how you find yourself at number 5 and number 3 in the power rankings on the new SEC podcast. You control the game on offense. You've looked to me as one of the most impressive teams in SEC play this season, against Florida domination, against Missouri, who's supposed to be good. Boston College played a close game. Vanderbilt played a close game. A&M beat A.
Yeah. It was a beatdown. It stopped the count now. They're in the SEC championship game. Between them, Texas and LSU, undefeated in conference play right now. They're going to get the opportunity to play Texas at the end of the season. It's looking favorable. They're now vying for a spot in the playoffs. I questioned them at the beginning of the year before the season started, even after the Notre Dame game. Like, is this defense what we expected it to be? Does it have potential to get there? I think it does, and it's getting there now. DB's had some room for improvement. They had the PI that didn't get called early. Luther Burden's touchdown getting called back for an offensive lineman downfield. Theo Weiss, like, there was an inch off on that seam ball. I mean, this was all kind of right there at the beginning of the game.
Right.
All things that could have gone, had it gone the other way, the momentum may have changed, but Wegman played great. If the DBs just continue to improve, we've seen it every week, continue to improve, this is a team that's super, super dangerous. I mean, Miss State, LSU, South Carolina up ahead after a bye week. They have a much needed bye week after going 6 in a row. So
yeah. I think it's a good flow though. You go 6 bye week, 3 bye week, 3. So 6-3-3. I think that's not too bad, especially when you're typically you're front loaded with some of your more out of conference games where you're probably paying the school to play you. But with Bowling Green, exactly, which Bowling Green was a close game too. They gave him a game though, but A&M is pulling these games out. I think all things considered, if you take away the name bias, it's like this team is first in the SEC right now. They're winning the games they're supposed to be winning. They're winning them pretty dominantly, and any given Saturday. And I think the A&M's in a lot of games on these Saturdays based upon what I've been seeing from them the past couple weeks. I think I had their projection season start with 7-5, and so they're already well on pace to get to that 7 number or more. But really impressive from what we've seen from A&M. I like them in Mississippi State, LSU, and SC. I think at the beginning of the season, I'm looking at my predictions here on the right. I did predict them to win those games. So we'll see. We'll definitely see. The A&M LSU one's always fun. Yeah,
that'll be a good game. On the flip side of the ball, Missouri, tough day in College Station for them. Nothing went right, especially early on. If anything could have gone wrong, it did. And early on, that pass to Luther Burden to open the game, I was like, all right, here we go. Like, they're going to start getting some big plays. They're going to pass the ball a little bit more, air it out this game. Then everything went downhill pretty quickly.
Yeah, and Missouri is learning what it's like to play with expectations. Last year was an amazing season. We know what they did, Cotton Bowl, et cetera, but this year they're playing with expectations. And in this game, it's what I think we've talked about these past couple episodes, where offensively Brady Cook just hasn't looked like himself compared to last year. I'm not one to put players down, but I just feel like he just hasn't looked like he's had that same spark as he did last season. We've seen some of those. We haven't seen him be as efficient in the air to where we think he needs to be for this team to be in that championship contention. Like, if you're going to be a top 15 team, you got to have a top 15 quarterback in the country for the most part, or a top 15 runner. And they have a good tandem in the backfield, but the quarterback play is more important, I would say. We just haven't seen it. And this game, A&M was able to bottle him up. He looks pretty flustered back there. Really wasn't able to get too much going passing until about the fourth quarter with that, that big 75-yarder for Theo Weiss. But it's like, where do you go from here, Missouri? Where do you go from here in this game? I think if you get blown out like this, but you dominated BC, you dominated Vandy, you might feel a little different. But the general feeling right now feels kind of like, who are we, and are we going to get to where we thought we were going to be at? Yeah.
Like, offensively, you need to figure out how to get, when you have games like this, okay, you've been running the ball phenomenally. When you get in a game like this and you're not running well, you got to do something to change that. And I think going into the game, your game plan had to have been that you're not going to run the ball effectively. I would have liked to see maybe some better receiving play calling. They aired the ball out a little bit. They only threw one screen on the day. You have guys who can make plays after the ball. We've seen Luther Burden break free on 20-yard plus Yak, catching the ball behind the line and running Theo Weiss same way. Like, use them. You have them, especially when the running backs. Nate Noel and Carroll combined for only 56 yards on the 18 carries between the two. So it's not working. They couldn't get their guys involved. I'm going to need to see more from the passing on this team. They've been great. They were second in the country on third down conversions going into this game, and dropped it off considerably after this. Only going 5 for 15 or on the day, and then defensively, they just gave up way too much. They came out limp, soft on defense. The zones were loose. I think that they had a different game plan. They studied for the wrong test.
They studied for the wrong test. Back to the test. But class is in session this episode. But they studied for the wrong test, and I think we've kind of seen some of that in the passing game from Castellanos in that game against BC, right? They were able to lock him down on the ground. I don't think he had more than 20, 30 yards, but he had a couple passing touchdowns on them. You saw it against Diego Pavia. He had a couple passing touchdowns. So like we know Diego would be more of a runner, but we've seen this defense kind of show some suspectness from the defensive back position, and it was more on the rushing defense, right? Le'Veon Moss, over 100 yards, 3 touchdowns, just massive big plays. And so I think the 3 areas for me to build on is less big plays, kind of work on the pass defense, and then figure out a way to kind of take this solid run game you have right now and intertwine some pass packages where, like you said, where you're getting burned the ball on screens. You're getting, Theo Weiss on these screens that go up the middle of the field potentially. Mixing some slants, some post. Theo Weiss is a great route runner. I mean, we've seen it. We saw it in the game, but it's just it's tough. And this offensive line's been more tested recently these past couple of weeks than what we've seen earlier in the season. It's like right after we make these reels, things just change.
Yeah, they do. They do. I mean, so wrapping up on Mizzou, you got UMass next, tee up on them. And then you got to get ready. Auburn, Alabama, Oklahoma. You got a lot ahead. And these are all teams that, like, right now you could beat them. Like, you could beat Auburn, you could beat Alabama, and you could beat Oklahoma. But to have any playoff chances, you probably need to go at least 2 for 3 there.
Right.
You still have South Carolina and Arkansas that you need to win as well.
Absolutely. And I think there's the playoff chances, like record-wise, and then there's the playoff ability. Like, what do you show me on the field, right? And I think right now, like, going from an A&M perspective, their record shows me playoff. Their field play shows me playoff chances if they stay at the ceiling. To me, Missouri's play shows me, first couple teams out right now. Yeah. And I think their schedule lends to, can you show me something against Bama? You beat Auburn close. Okay. All right. I respect it. If you hang in with Bama, all right, you're back in that playoff discussion for me. If you beat Bama, we understand where you're at. But if you hang in that game and you look more impressive than you did this game, I think it's a different type of discussion when it comes to what I think about Missouri. There's another game that was going on at 3:30. I think it was on national television, but it might have been overshadowed by the Bama Vanderbilt game. But this game specifically featured a team that Bama beat, Georgia, playing against Auburn. And Georgia was looking to, redeem their previous loss the previous week. And Georgia, business as usual, I would say. That's always my go-to. A lot of players involved. Dominic Lovett got a touchdown. Beck was able to get a couple touchdowns. Etienne was in the end zone. And this offense just did what they normally do. But was this impressive? Did this, what would you grade this performance?
So I'd say they did well. I mean, it was a bounce back win against an Auburn team that I would say, if you can put up that many points, you had a good offensive performance against this Auburn defense. Offensively, I still think there's some issues to address. I mean, they're 70th in the country in points scored. Like, their offense has room to grow still in this game. I think showed that. Defensively, they look great. I think that's the key for this performance, and the way I would grade this performance is based on their defense. I would say, you win an SEC game, you got to get a good grade from it, because it always means something. This is a semi-rivalry game, right? And
this is a rivalry. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. This is a rivalry. They take it pretty seriously down here, I'm telling you.
I used to live like kind of between the two, and there were some Auburn fans, some Georgia fans at school, and definitely a rivalry. I mean, Georgia would have, if they had to trade one, they would have rather probably won the game last week.
And
if Auburn had to win one, they'd rather win the game at the end of the year. So
touche.
Both teams, Alabama's everybody's Super Bowl. But enough on Alabama. This is a Georgia segment. I think they played great defensively. They look solid. Anytime that Auburn got a good play on them, they adapted and ended that drive. Like, they didn't let them finish the drive after a big play, where that's so easy to do. So I got to give this the defense a lot of credit. They didn't get turnover off of Peyton Thorne, but they pressured him a ton and forced him to play a really conservative game, whether that was his ability or the play calling.
Yeah, they definitely forced them to play really conservatively, and we could talk about it from the turnovers for Auburn and the turnover segment. That's a kudos for you, Auburn. But for Georgia, they played a really solid defensive game, only giving up I think 13 points. There was some drives in this game that could have resulted in touchdowns, and they limited them to field goals. Like I said, I put in my notes for the power rankings. It's just Georgia to me they're serviceable on offense. They're serviceable on defense. At one point they were the number one pass defense in the country, and they're still kind of floating around that top 10. But they're like a Acura. It's very serviceable. They're gonna if this is a race, they're gonna beat most cars, but they're beatable. But this was not a game that to me I felt like they were going to lose. I think my prediction was exactly the score, or around this score. If I'm not mistaken. So not to my own horn.
I think you're right, though. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. It feels like they do enough on offense. It doesn't scare you, but I saw some stuff from Colby Young. I think at that big 27-yarder later in the game. I wanted to see him get more involved. He's their big guy. He kind of gives me like George Pickens vibes, like not nearly as good, of course, but just big guy who can make these kind of Des Bryant type plays. And catch the ball over top. So he did that. Dominic Lovett's their speedy guy. He had 1 or 2 touchdowns this game, and everyone got involved. No one is like scary, but they're serviceable enough to beat most teams in this country. And you saw that against Auburn. So it wasn't like, oh, this is impressive, but it was exactly what they're supposed to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you got to look at it like right in the context of what Auburn is. How do they play to that level? I mean, you won by 18, you go home happy. It's a good win. They gave up some big plays, right? Like KLS had 95 yards on 7 catches.
He gonna get his every time.
Yeah,
he gonna get his.
I mean, look,
hey,
he's solid. Like you don't want to give those numbers up, but if you're doing it, you didn't let them finish the drives that he's getting those plays on. He had a couple, catches throughout there, 20 some yards plus, and they get right back and tee back up on Peyton Thorne and let him have it. So, with this Georgia team, I don't want to talk too much about this game. They did what they were supposed to do. The offense is still improving. The defense is showing what they can do. They have Texas in 2 weeks, but Mississippi State next. If you're Georgia, can you look past Mississippi State to the Texas game, or do you think there's something for Georgia to worry about against Mississippi State with their offense not firing?
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to the one of the press conferences, Kirby was talking about the conference depth and how Vanderbilt. This is a deep conference. It's the SEC, and I'm paraphrasing here, but I think with those comments coming from Kirby, I don't think you can overlook Mississippi State. Kevin Coleman can do some things in the air as a receiver. Michael Van Buren, he's an unknown. He's only played 1 or 2 games, so he could show a little bit more. It would, again, you can go off of what you think is going to happen or what you've seen in the past, and either way, whatever direction you go, there's still a new day, and anything can happen. And so like if you go off the stats, you shouldn't worry at all.
Yeah.
The Mississippi State defense is one of the least impressive defenses in the country. But like you said, from an offensive perspective, Georgia's offense doesn't really lighten up the scoreboard. And these like 14-3 or 21-7, like it sounds odd, but it doesn't make you always feel like they're controlling the game, but they are in control. And so, I mean, I would imagine the game is, 40-14 maybe, but if it's not 40-14, it'll probably be in that 31-13 range. They're going to let you get a couple field goals, maybe get a touchdown later in the game. And so, I don't think it's anything to worry, but it's definitely not one to sleep on. I think there's a very distinct eye on Georgia and how they perform each week to earn that top 5 spot. And you gotta show out a little bit from a style perspective. If you're not going to have this super electric offense, you need to show out on defense. And you kind of need to look like, okay, if we're going to be earning, if say we don't win the conference, we're vying for a seeding. We need to look good. You're Georgia, so you'll get a good seed, but you gotta look good though.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that they necessarily won with style points against Auburn, but they won the game. I think that the Alabama game, they could have gone either way. They could have won that game. So for Georgia, I think we might be sound low energy on this segment because, they're coming off of a loss and it's like, you just want to see them get back on track. And I think this game is back on track enough. Like you won the game, you're at home, you won by 18, go home. You're happy with it. You play Mississippi State next. You're probably going to win that game. You got Texas. That's going to be the big one that either makes or breaks your season. You win that game. With Texas maybe still at number 1 after this, Oklahoma-Texas game.
Yeah.
Maybe Oregon or Ohio State jumping them. Who knows with how that game goes this upcoming weekend. But, if you're Georgia, that's kind of what you're looking to put you back in that conversation. So, a good week from Georgia.
A good week from Georgia. They got one more quiz before their midterm exam, which is University of Texas. And so that'll determine how the rest of their semester goes, for sure, given the Alabama loss. But they won this game.
Yeah.
Offense is serviceable. Offense is good. It's still a good offense. I'm not fully buying all the way into the point total because you have the defense to offset that. But this offense is good enough. They've shown us they can come back. They've shown us they can win this game. And so all is okay in Georgia world. Just go to the games. You heard Kirby. Get loud. Go to the games. He doesn't have to say it again, but you're winning the games. They look good against Auburn. And it's always better to end up in the win column. So, good for the Dogs. Go Dogs. On the other flip side, flip it over. We got Auburn, the Tigers, the Cats. Auburn. Yeah. This, to me, when I think about this game, positives, no turnovers. Keandre Lambert does what he does. Florida ceiling analogy, I just feel like their ceiling is really low. Like this defense only lets up, that amount of points for the most part of the game. And your offense is having turnovers, which and Jarquez Hunter has 91 yards and you only can put up 13 points. I'm just, what are we expecting here?
Yeah. And for Auburn, this is maybe the first game that you maybe don't feel like you had an opportunity to win down the stretch. Like the other games you had a shot, but now you dropped 3 in a row. You're looking down the barrel of the rest of the season. And there's really only one more game that you're guaranteed to win. And that's Yale Monroe. And like, even then I don't, there's no guarantees for sure, but like
right.
You're kind of counting, we got to get a couple more for a bowl game and you don't see it. So from here, you're looking at this and you're like, okay, the positives, no turnovers. Peyton Thorne, the offensive game plan seemed to me, and comparatively to what they did at Florida with Graham Mertz a couple weeks ago, where they took this game plan and made it a little bit more conservative. Let's build some confidence. No long shots. Let's make it where there's not a whole lot of decisions that need to be made.
Yeah.
And, he made some great throws, fit some tight windows, but it seems like that where let's build up the confidence, get him right before we kind of air it out. And they're playing with house money now. Like, you're not making the playoffs. Like, let's try to work towards the better end of the season. And this was probably the game to do it because you were coming in as dogs to this and your winnable games are left, like Missouri, Kentucky.
Yeah. And your winnable games, feature offenses that have not been as explosive. So Missouri, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, as offenses look pretty impressive. But for what this defense is able to do, I mean, they were able to slow down Oklahoma. They were able to slow down Arkansas for the most part. They're going to keep them in some games, I think. It's just going to be more of what you see from the offense. It's one of those years. Peyton Thorne's he looked better this game. You'd love to kind of see more what they have in the quarterback room as you think about next season. At least is what I would be thinking about. If you're an Auburn fan, you listen to this segment, please let us know what you're thinking about because I want to know. I really want to know, and I'd love to talk about it. But when I look at this team, and like I said, you dropped 3 straight, this is not a program that plays for bowl games. You obviously want to win games. You want to get recruits. You want to build on having guys like Deuce McKnight commit to your program. But the product on the field this season, what we see, during those 4 quarters, has not been giving us from what we want to see in Jordan Hare, from what I understand, or in Sanford Stadium this past week.
Yeah. And going into this game, you wanted to see a big game for KLS. You wanted to see a big game from Jarquez Hunter, and like you didn't necessarily see a masterpiece from either. Like Keandre Lambert-Smith, great game. Jarquez Hunter broke off the 38-yard run there for a touchdown, but he didn't touch the ball barely, enough for a guy of his caliber if you want to be in a game of this degree. So going forward, the game plan just needs to be solid. The defense needs to continue to do what they do. Keldrick Falk, probably one of the best pass rushers in the country right now at getting to the quarterback. He still had 2 sacks in this game, a ton more pressures getting to him. So you have guys, you have talent on the ball. And like I mentioned, there were a lot of games that they were in, they could have won. They lost the Oklahoma game with that pick. Like, there's a lot of opportunity, and you're going into a bye week.
Yeah.
Figure it out, get it right. You could beat Mizzou, you can beat Kentucky, you can beat Vanderbilt, you can beat A&M. Shoot, you can beat Alabama. Like, there's anything that could happen with this Auburn team from here on out. It's just one game at a time.
Yeah.
And I think the first step was not turning over the ball. I hate to say the thing that everyone else is going to say, but you didn't turn over the ball.
You didn't turn over the ball.
That's a positive. Be happy with it.
Yeah.
And then kind of build on that. You figured out the offensive game plan that works for Peyton Thorne to where he's not going to turn over the ball.
Exactly. I think that's a huge positive to build off of. And like you see, look at that the rest of the schedule. Mizzou is definitely winnable. UK is winnable. Vanderbilt's interesting. Winnable. UL Monroe should be a win. And if you go to the next 4 games, say you take 2 of those, let's say you beat UK, you beat Vandy, maybe you beat UL Monroe, you go 3-1 or 2-2. You're probably feeling a little bit better. You're feeling a little bit better about how your season's going. But this game was definitely not the best from a just collectively. It's like they did good on the test. You got a C+. You needed an A to pass. You could beat Alabama A&M with a C+. You can beat certain teams in this conference with a C+ grade, but Georgia's pretty good. So
yeah, I don't think that they're throwing helmets after the game. Like they went into this, they're 2-4 now. Like they know what they need to work on.
Yeah.
I guarantee you. And it will happen. Auburn will win a couple more games this year. I don't know who yet, but they'll be able to make it click.
Game, I think number 4 that we're covering here is Ole Miss versus South Carolina. Ole Miss was coming into this game favored 3:30 Eastern. They were able to win this game against South Carolina in Columbia. And we saw a very impressive performance on both sides of the ball. The offense was able to put up 27. Defense only gave up 3 points, forced a couple turnovers. Rebel Nation, are we back? Are we back in the mix? What are we thinking?
Yeah, I mean, you come off of a loss. You play well here. Both sides of the ball, like you mentioned, played awesome. I mean, defense, I think, is the key for this game. You wanted to see them win in style points now in this week.
I did.
You said that. We need to see some style points. I think it's some style points. Defense got 16 hurries on the day. DBs did a great job keeping the play in front of them against a quarterback who can run. 2 quarterbacks played in the game. Both can run. Kept everything in front of them. Chris Paul Jr., 3 quarterback hits on the day. Walter Noel, 2 sacks. Like the defense was firing, and that's what you want to see coming off of a loss. A good coach team. Kirby Smart did it this week against Auburn. Lane Kiffin did it this week here against South Carolina. You get your team right. They go in and they show that what happened the week before was not them. And this defense here is going to be fine. And honestly, looking forward is probably going to be the way that this team wins football games.
Yeah, I think this defense is definitely going to pave the way. And you talked about Paul, that man who wears number 11 is an absolute dog. And getting into the backfield, the defense was able to get Lenore Sellers on the ground 6 times. This is his 3rd straight game with an interception for Lenore Sellers. One of course forced by Ole Miss, and so this defense is super impressive. They paved the way for where this game was going, but offensively starting off, they got off to a really quick 13-0 lead. Super explosive plays. You got guys like Trey Harris, Juice Wells. I think he was coming back from an injury, if I'm not mistaken. He looked pretty impressive, and probably could have made this game like a 30+ point game if he didn't fumble there on that massive pass going into the end zone.
Playing against his old team, he's trying to show out.
He's trying to show out a little something. So
yeah, I mean the offense is firing, the defense is firing. I think in this game, it's now like you had some fallout from this game. Trey Harris could be out for who knows how long. At the time of recording this, it's Tuesday. As of right now, there's no real word. Lane Kiffin said if the game's played today, he's not playing. So he is your best offensive player right now. And, he's outsnapped or double the next highest targets on the team. He's doubled Juice Wells' targets. 53 receptions for him, 86 for the rest of the team combined. So he is like the go-to guy. He's established the identity of the way this offense fires, that play action first, throw it across the middle of the field to a guy like him. If you don't have him and you're going into LSU next, the game plan shifts a little bit.
It shifts a lot. Especially when this LSU defense has looked pretty suspect throughout this season and some of these games we've played outside of South Alabama, of course. It changes. You're going to need to see more from Henry Parrish on the ground to kind of make up for it. You have to see more from Juice Wells, obviously. And they got a couple other guys involved in this game. Jackson Dart was averaging like 10.6 yards a pass from the last game. I would expect to see more of that against LSU, just given what we've seen from the pass defense. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of what they craft up game plan wise without Trey Harris, who's a dynamic playmaker and right now top 3. I think each week it shuffles on who's the best receiver in the SEC, but he's had weeks where he's been the best guy. By no means is it owned by someone thus far this season.
Yeah, I mean, you have a tough road now for Ole Miss. Like, this is kind of entering their stretch. LSU, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Georgia. You realistically only want to drop one of those. Ole Miss could beat any of these teams with the way that they played this week and with the way that they played against Kentucky. Like, who knows? Like, I think the identity of this team defensively is looking strong. Offensively, I'm very curious to see how it looks next week. But the future's bright for Ole Miss. You came back and you showed that Kentucky wasn't normal. That was the outlier.
Yeah, they did a really good job showing that was an outlier. I mean, all around great performances. Like I said, from the guys we know, Dart. We saw Puegs, their big converted tight end. He's a little TD merchant. He got him 2 tutties this game. Big dog, let the big dog eat. Some big big stops here. They had a couple 4th down stops on South Carolina. So just a lot to say positively about this defense led by Paul Jr. And then, on the offensive side, just back to what we've come to see and know. That's what earned Ole Miss this top 5, top 10 rating in the past. And so they keep showing games like this, playoff lock to me, no doubt. And then when I look at these next couple games, I know you talked about it. So you got LSU, by Oklahoma, Arkansas, and then UGA. By no means are any of those cupcakes, but they'll probably be favored, I'm assuming, in at least 2 of the 4.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see for sure.
Definitely. Flip side of the ball, South Carolina, nothing went right for them. Beamer in the press conference was not happy. Wasn't happy with the team. He wasn't happy with the fake injuries from Ole Miss.
Interesting take. We can talk about the fake injuries. I love the way that he talked around that. That was very well worded. Yeah, very well worded. Injured. I hope they're not injured. I hope they're not. I hope they're fine. But it does seem like there's a higher propensity for a player to get hurt after a first down. That's an interesting stat to bring up. So
Kiffin's. I mean, until there's a rule punishing him for it, why not take advantage of it? I think it's a little cheesy from a sportsmanship standpoint, but it was far from the reason that South Carolina lost this game. 27-3, somewhat smoked. I mean, both quarterbacks had turnovers, and the worst part about that is that their turnovers happened on Ole Miss's side of the field. Yep. So, 2 on the day there, 3 in the loss to LSU. When they turn over the ball, they're losing games. The math adds up. Anytime that you spin it that way, you turn over the ball, you lose. They struggled to effectively run the ball. It just didn't go well for them. And I think it was Ole Miss kind of coming out to play, but South Carolina still needed to show a little bit more.
Yeah, South Carolina definitely needed to show a little bit more. And, you want to say that there's a lot of positives on the defensive side. You only quote unquote gave up 27 points, but it wasn't a pretty 27. It was a lot of big plays. On the defense had a hard time getting off the field, and they were on the field a lot of the game. But offensively, that's got to be the story. For where South Carolina was a week or 2 ago, beating Kentucky and then taking care of business against one of the G5 teams in their schedule. They looked like there was enough here to have them compete in a lot of games. This was a massive regression in this game.
Yeah,
and the regression to me wouldn't be as much of a concern if I had seen more in the passing game from Lenore Sellers. He's only got 2 touchdowns on the year. This is his 3rd straight game with an interception. I mean, you're giving the ball to the other team on the ground and fumbles. You're giving the ball to the other team on the ground in the air. You're not going to win games like that in mini conferences with that type of play at quarterback. And you're definitely not going to win games in the SEC.
No, and he's their leading rusher in the game. The receivers aren't getting separation. Like, I can't point to one thing. Coaching mistakes kind of all over the field, bad calls. Penalties are still continuing to be an issue. Yep. I think right now through 5 games, it's like over 40 penalties for 376 total yards. Like, they're making mistakes. This was a sloppier mistake, and you're going into I've said this for every team. You're going into a tough stretch. It's kind of that time of the season, but you're playing Alabama next week, and defensively, you want to be in a place where you might be able to get a couple stops on Alabama, where I feel like they played in this game. I don't see where they're stopping them. They're going to get the edge rush, but your offense isn't going to score any points if you play like this. You're not going to be able to run the ball. You're not going to be able to throw the ball. South Carolina going forward, we need to see what we saw against LSU, even though they lost that game, see what we saw against Kentucky.
Yeah.
For us to feel confident in them going forward, I feel like.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I would need to see. And I think these couple games to me are really reflective of the stats of where these teams rank defensively and what it means for what South Carolina can do offensively. And to me, that's kind of very telling of how far this team will go. So like, if you look at the schedule based upon what I'm saying here, it's, South Carolina was able to have their way offensively against LSU. LSU's defense is bad, kept them in the game. South Carolina was able to have their way against UK. I think that was more of an anomaly, but it shows me what their ceiling was. Akron, it doesn't really show me that much, but I understand what this rushing defense can do. And then Ole Miss has one of the better defenses. They struggle. So you got Bama coming up. This defense is okay. They're coming with something to prove. So this is an opportunity for South Carolina potentially to show us more on the ground, which is what we've seen in past games. You got Oklahoma, pretty tough defense. That's going to be a battle for you. That might be a harder game to win with that defense. And you got Texas A&M, another stout defense. You got guaranteed 2 to 3 tough defenses coming up. What will we see from this offense to keep them in games is really going to be the main question to me in terms of what decides their record coming up for the middle stretch.
Definitely does. And they're going to be looking for a bowl game. It's hard to pick out 3 wins, but they can get there. They can get there.
They can definitely get there. There's not many teams in this conference I don't see hope for where we are standings wise. And South Carolina is not one of those teams I don't see hope. Like, they can definitely get to a bowl game. I mean, this is not doom and gloom. They're 3-2. This is their second loss of the season. Like, the first loss was, to me, a game that they should have won. And we can talk about that another time with LSU. But this is only their second loss of the season.
Yeah. All is well there. Florida Gators, UCF. Florida rivalry. UCF was favored going into this game. It kept flipping back and forth. KJ Jefferson, former SEC quarterback at Arkansas, in the swamp. Florida kind of came to play. I think the score doesn't even necessarily show that Florida probably could have won by more had they kept their foot on the gas. But this looks good if you're looking at Florida going forward. I mean, we were questioning a couple weeks ago, is Florida going to win any more? Where is Florida going to win any more games? And they're kind of putting it together a little bit.
Yeah, they've been kind of putting it together here. You get a win against Samford, get a win against Mississippi State. You won the bye week. You beat UCF, and I agree with you. I don't think the score fully indicates the game control. Outside of UCF getting a field goal in the first half, I mean, this was mostly Florida's game. Graham Mertz was having his way. The running game left a little bit more to be desired. But this defense controlled KJ Jefferson. They controlled this rushing game from UCF, which is top 5 in the nation in yards per game. And so that speaks to the defensive improvements. They've taken the tutoring. They're improving. And then offensively, we're seeing kind of what we've been used to seeing in terms of, putting up a couple touchdowns in the game. And so Florida impressed me. They won against a good Power 4 team. And so a lot to build upon there. Yeah.
I mean, UCF coming into this game, number 2 in the country in rushing yards. Per game, that was kind of their whole motto and mantra. And they held them to 108. Yep. And in this game, the key going into it was force KJ Jefferson to throw the ball, get them out of their game. And they did just that, like Colorado did. And it worked out in their favor. They got 5 sacks, a ton of pressure all around. Defensively for Florida, we finally see the D line starting to fire a little bit against UCF, which whatever, I mean, I want to see it in the SEC. I'm not discrediting anything, but still the defensive line firing. Offensive line played great. No sacks on the day. We saw these 2 units struggle against Miami early on and then slow progression to get to where we're at, where they're getting a ton of sacks and they're not letting up any other sacks on the other side of the ball. Maybe this was the game where everything's starting to smooth out and finding some momentum.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you. I think this is the game to me that things looked a little bit smoother. They looked to be coming into the team that they are right now, like I think they've come a long way from where they were at the beginning of the season, where and I think in both of our power rankings, they were second to last or dead last. The 14 spot is not indicative of how impressed I've been by this Florida team the past couple of weeks. I just need to see it against more stiffer competition. But UCF is a quality opponent. The Mississippi State performance in a vacuum against that type of team was impressive. I think they took care of business. They didn't play with their food. And the Swamp actually looked intimidating again. Like it actually looked like it was hard to play in the Swamp this past week. KJ Jefferson looked like he did not belong in the SEC, and that's why he wasn't. And for Florida coming up here, you have Tennessee, UK, and then another bye week. How should Florida fans be feeling about Tennessee going to Tennessee with Tennessee coming off a loss?
It's not a fun situation to be in. I think there's no pretty way to paint the picture of what Florida's schedule looks like, other than to say, okay, Florida State isn't that bad anymore, but everything else is kind of rough, and Tennessee is that next test, and they're going to be a tough one to play against. But Nico and the Tennessee team is susceptible to pressure if you can get it. If you can get the same kind of pressure like you had this week, you might have a good shot there. It's one game at a time for this Florida team. And I think one of the keys is maybe playing Lagway a little bit more. So far, no incompletions in his last 2 games, only 11 attempts, but he's completing everything. Getting him more involved in the games will make your other team's film sessions a little bit tougher. Your practice squads are starting to have to show 2 different looks, one representing Mertz, one representing Lagway, and you don't know which one you're going to get on game day. And I think that maybe provides something interesting. Missouri didn't know who they were game planning for, and they looked like they weren't ready for Wegman. They bring out Lagway a little bit more when someone's prepared for Mertz. It could be a flip situation. So I kind of have started to grow to like this 2 quarterback set.
Yeah, they're making it work. And I think it's a really good point when you talk about having a scheme for 2 different quarterbacks, and not many teams have Graham Mertz as their practice dummy in practice. And I know a lot of teams will have DJ Lagway, right? He's 5-star guy. He's looked super impressive these past couple games. And it's starting to give some of these teams offensive mismatches. Mm-hmm. Florida's they're just doing enough to win games but they haven't had to sweat it. That's got to be a good feeling, right? Going from getting blown out to Miami to now you're not sweating these games. It's not like you're in these Auburn type games where you're super close with Oklahoma and you're super close with Cal. It's like these are games that they've been winning definitively. Style points, respect to Florida. Good for Billy Napier. Yeah. A lot to build upon offensively. Want to see more from the run game, but a lot to build upon in the passing game and a much improved rush defense and pass defense from what I've seen from Florida. So the schedule, maybe Tennessee might be overlooking them, thinking about Alabama the following week, but it should be a really fun one down there in Knoxville.
Definitely. And all around a fun week next week. We have a couple, huge games coming up in the Red River rivalry, first one in the SEC. It's going to be a big game. Alabama, South Carolina, we got a lot to look at and might shake up the SEC even more than this week did. So, catch us for the previews in the next episode where we'll be breaking down the keys to the games, the lines, predictions, and some picks for those.
Yeah, we're gonna have a really great episode, and maybe we'll pan it out a little bit more to the country as well. We got Oregon, Ohio State, so that's got playoff implications. So you might catch a preview of that game in our upcoming preview episode this week. But great SEC football for Week 6, volcanic like eruption. Week 7 is gonna be great as well. So if you like this, please follow, subscribe. Thank you for tuning in. This is a new SEC podcast, and until next time.